Thank you for listening to Lone Star Community Radio. This program was broadcasted and recorded live from the LSCR studios in downtown Conroe, Texas. Lone Star Community Radio is supported by listeners like you. Donate and sponsor today. For more information on getting involved with Lone Star Community Radio, contact us at lscrstudios@gmail.com or visit us online at www.irlonestar.com.
Welcome back to Genuine Business Stories, the show where we go deeper than tactics and talk about the real journey behind the building of something meaningful.
Amen.
Grab your coffee, pull up a chair on the front porch with us, and let's have a real conversation. Today's guest has built a career at the intersection of psychology, leadership, and business performance. Along the way, she's worked inside elite performance environments, including a chapter working with Tony Robbins. But that's just one part of a much bigger story. What makes today's conversation powerful isn't their names or their titles. It's the work that she's done helping business owners understand why they think the way they think, why they get stuck, and how to identify what quietly drives success or self-sabotage. This episode is for business owners who know the strategy, but feel like the real work is internal. And real quick, Sandy, I do want to touch on Tony Robbins' chapter a little later, but not as a headline, just because it's shaped part of the journey that you've been in. So we'll come back to that.
Excellent.
Morning, Sandy. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me, Clint.
Great.
I'm excited for our episode.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. And to the audience, this is our first remote. Sandy, you found us online, right?
I did.
So tell a little bit about that, because that was interesting. And at first, because our show's newer, I was checking going, who is Sandy and why is she wanting to come on our show in Montgomery County? And the more I learned about Sandy, the more I was going, wow, I'm really grateful that she wants to come on our show. So kind of describe how you found us, and then let's dive right in.
Well, I have a pretty big following on Facebook, and I've been on a lot of podcasts for the trades during the last couple of years. I found you online. I think you were promoting the podcast, and I thought, wow, I really went back and watched some of the episodes that you had done, and I feel as if it's almost like when you're in school and you have your high achievers and you have the guys that have the IEPs, and then the middle of the ground gets left out. So for business owners that are not corporate and the ones that are not just starting out, where's the help and guidance for the business owners that are in the middle of the ground? And I feel as if you bring some really great nuggets to that world, and you're hitting on topics that other people don't find as interesting. So this is really the semantics of what makes someone succeed in business as opposed to level up. There's like a difference in that.
Well, with your background and what we're going to talk about today, that means a lot to me, because that is exactly what Dick and I discussed when we started working to put this show together, is what we felt was left out. And for me, when we started the show, as we discussed a little bit, it was opening my commercial insurance brokerage right before COVID. And it changed the whole set of rules. And through the time as we've grown, it's been other small businesses where you're going, hey, we love the stories of the person that was homeless, and then all of a sudden they've got 2 Lear jets and have succeeded as entrepreneurs. That's awesome. But it was also, that's always fun and gives you that pipe dream, but it is the small businesses, coaches like yourself, that help those small businesses survive and grow through the hard times, that provide an inspiration for myself. So thank you for that. And let's get in and describe your work today as it exists.
Well, right now I work with high achieving leaders, sales teams, sales professionals, and people that are in small business, really reinvent how they operate mentally, emotionally, strategically. If it's really where I had the identity meets high performance and brand leadership. So that's kind of where I would describe myself into that middle ground, based on all of my prior experience, found that was the intersect that's missing. And we can we'll throw that on its head. I'm a little bit non-conforming, so it'll show up as we go along.
So I'd like to start off, and we'll also close with this, for your business, for somebody that is needing a coach with your background, tell them a little bit about how they can get in touch with you, your business, and let's go ahead and get that out there as people listen to our show.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. Obviously, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all as Sandy Papavero, pretty easy to find. And my website is sandypapavero.com.
Great. So who do you serve most often? The founders, sales teams, leadership teams, trade and service business? Kind of tell us where your niche is and what you'd like to see. And I'm sure you work with all different types of businesses, but
I do. So from my experience, I came from, more of an entrepreneurial background. And so there's single man in a truck. There's guys that are, lawyers that are trying to grow their practices. I deal with a ton of trades owners just because I'm pretty well known in the industry after years of speaking around the country and showing up on podcasts for the trades. So I would say it's more not really what kind of business you're in. It is the characteristics of the business owner. They're looking for someone who is against what the industry represents in a coaching forum. And when we look to the trades, I'm completely against how the trade coaching organization works. So I think it's kind of people like me who are more non-conforming, looking to build a brand, set themselves apart from competitors and not in a price factor. But they have an internal drive to be successful. Maybe they are successful. They just hit that ceiling and they're emotionally overwhelmed. So I work with the leaders, but whenever I work with anyone who has a team, I need to get inside everyone. It is about alignment throughout the entire team. So I learned from years of doing this, working with the leader is like listening to your mom tell the story of your family. We need to talk to the kids too. So getting them, to understand the vision of the owner is why I work with everyone.
See, that's one of the things with coaches like yourself that I love. They've got some amazing companies that bring people on and they become coaches for them, and they even own their own franchise part of it. Those are fantastic, but I find that it's a program they've put together. For me, when I go to somebody for counsel, I'm not looking for you to walk through a set statistically, because as we talked about, I do have a little bit of background on the coaching business side. I'm needing you to see what I'm doing and go, yes, but here's where I'm hearing you've got a gap in. And a lot of times when you're able to come in and do what you do and listen, then you hear things that you might not hear if you're coming in just to put processes in place. I find it's a little difficult to put all your processes in place before you know anything about that business. So,
Great.
So that is one thing that I noticed when we were talking that I really appreciated about the way you've structured your business. So when people come to you and say, Sandy, I need your help, does it vary what outcomes they're looking for? Is it help with processes? Is it profitability? Is it marketing? Kind of share with us a little bit about what you see from your side when somebody calls you.
I think one of my greatest gifts is I see blind spots, and I see them, and I use that as a metaphor. I do see them. I listen for them, and I ask a really great round of questions that helps them to understand some of where they're not seen. So yes, we could say it's showing up in marketing, it's showing up in a low sales conversion, or it's showing up in the competitor strategy. But it really isn't. That's just a symptom of what they're missing on the front end. So I will say my superpower is being a neurolinguistic practitioner. I've learned the mind and the language, and to listen for language. I'm looking for pattern recognition. And when they come to me and they say, I'm not marketing correctly, I'm not getting leads in, or my sales aren't converting, my sales team, they're just not getting the message out, and we're constantly undervaluing ourselves. That's a symptom. So for me, it's pretty easy. And I'd say on the consultation call, walking them through a very direct framework, I'm able to pretty much sum up that 90% of what's going on is within the leader's identity.
So we talked for about an hour. I'm going to do something I normally don't do. I'm going to make myself open and vulnerable in our talk. what did you see if you were my coach, what you were going, this is where I see that he's missing? And not in big detail. I don't want you doing something for nothing, but we did talk for a little bit. And knowing me, I talked quite a bit.
No, we had a wonderful conversation, and if you're willing to be vulnerable, I'll go right into it.
Go right into it.
So a lot of your language was around where you started, and for me, what I saw in you was the gap of I always look for conditioning and childhood conditioning. So you shared stories from your childhood, how you grew up, you had humble beginnings. And I listen for that because undercharging usually comes from that prior conditioning. And then there's also the self-doubt that creeps in and not charging your worth, selling from your own pocket, if you will. So I saw a lot of that. I listened for a lot of that. I think you didn't give yourself, you were very humble, and you didn't give yourself the props that you deserve. There's guilt that was in there from some of what you had gone on with your first marriage, and then how you've learned from that process, which coming from someone who's divorced, it's not the easiest situation to navigate. So you know that you took those learnings of what you did in the beginning, and now you're bringing a whole new Clint to your next phase of life.
Oh, I hate failure if you didn't pick up on that. So I always figure I better learn or I repeat.
Well, and that is probably one of the biggest takeaways, that people do not understand that the patterns repeat because it's survival mode. And we're constantly in the conditions that we once used. And what we use to survive in childhood doesn't serve us in adulthood.
Gotcha.
And that's where the new identity strategy has to come to shape.
Well, if it would surprise you, I had to learn humility. So that's kind of a trait that I practice, because when I was a lot younger, there was a lot of cockiness in there. Life has a way of helping you be humbled and get out of that mode.
And I respect that. I find that there's also, the ego works both ways. So it wasn't necessarily, sometimes we overperform. It really isn't that you were arrogant or cocky. It was that you were overperforming. You were looking to prove.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And I think some of the beginnings Dad provided for the family very well, but my dad was an humble man, and I would watch how he would really take care of people. If people were in a bind, then Dad was a very giving man, more so than I am. I need to be a little more giving, but that I think is where you see that the beginnings of childhood, where Dad very much took care of Mom and his family. Dad also was very frugal, and that taught me. And to go to what we're talking about, Dad taught me early on, if you want your own business, son, there are feast and there is famine, and you better control your debt. So you better figure out how not to have a whole lot of debt over you, because if that snowball starts to build or the dominoes start to fall, it can get out of hand pretty quick.
And that's very interesting, and that is also prior conditioning. I find that I had the mom who was ultra conservative and the dad who was a risk taker. So we learned early on. My mom she was one of those moms who was like, "Be careful," when my dad said, "Go out and do good things."
Yeah. And
understanding debt, it's really the strategy behind how you understand your money. So throughout my process of reading endless P&Ls, profit and loss statements for companies, I can see the identity gap. It's easy for me to see in the numbers, because we all make decisions for our business in our financial numbers, because that's where you should be making decisions. Although if your father were to run a business, he'd probably be conservative with his numbers, and I would see his identity through those numbers. So it's really interesting, some of the dynamic, right? And that you bring to the table, because that safety, as much as I want to say I love his, what he told you and his advice, but it'll also keep us stuck. It'll keep us too safe without taking some risks that need to happen in business.
Yeah, Dad had 3 different businesses, but he was very, very conservative in his expenditures. And a lot of that come back to being instilled because I had a business steal money from me and I lost everything. So that willing to risk, like we're talking about, You're right. Life beat the snot out of me with that, because when you watch everything you're working disappear, it kind of changes when you come back a little bit. And I would agree with you. It's also held me back too, because analysis paralysis, as I'm sure you picked up on, very analytical, and we'll find that it can, to make decisions that don't have long-term effects. I'm quick. Let's get a decision. But if I see a decision that could, if I get it wrong, could have that snowball effect and cost me everything again, then you are right. There is extreme caution in that calculated risk, you know.
And I find that we have certain expectations, right? We all have those mother-father wounds, and they carry through. So when I hear something like that, I know that you're stuck at a ceiling. And I come from the space where my goal was to be a millionaire by the time I was 30. Hit it at 31.
Me too.
And my ex-husband and I, we did hit that. However, we lost it all. So that does humble you, but it also teaches you a lesson of, I learned how to do it once. So there's a repeatable process that we can do it again. It's just more strategic this time.
Yeah.
But it never slowed me down. I think it really just gave me a different insight, and it taught me who I was internally, and I stopped looking externally. And then I used that as a catalyst to go back out after it.
Well, hey, I appreciate you sharing. So let's jump back into helping other businesses instead of this. So what services or offerings do you provide that drives the majority of revenue in the worlds of your business? Is when you analyze a company, do you analyze and then bring in trusted partners for, let's say, their social media, or do you handle all that in-house with your business? Do you teach them how to market, and then do you have a marketing company that on other sides of outside of social media that comes in, or how do you handle that with a business?
So I took everything that I didn't like in the companies I worked for before in coaching industry, and I thought to myself, what is the one core structure that's missing? And really, it's about the leader. So every person that comes into my world, I work on them first. So that's the psychotherapeutic side. Because let's give a little bit of an analogy to this. If I keep trying to give you business strategy, and I help you with your standard operating procedures, and I teach you how to sell from a psychological perspective, if I increase your marketing spend, or if I teach you how to read your numbers so that you can hit your intentions and your goals, that doesn't work unless we clean out the closet. So your closet is packed, and most of us have a mental capacity. Our nervous system can only hold so much. So the vulnerable work that I love that you use the word vulnerable, because there's, I deal with 99% men, which is interesting for me. However, when you come into my world, you better get ready to strip down naked, because we'll never can go forward if we're still holding on to a past that no longer serves us. So we clean the closet out in a mental capacity. We work on you. We start to understand the internal side to you. Then we can start with the business structure. And it's a framework, just like anything else. So depending on the coaching that we do, and I really don't like to use the word coaching, really, because I think of coaching, offense, defense, playing a sport. This is really the psychotherapeutic side. And I want people to stop running away from their past and running towards the future. And that's going to start with you. So all that old conditioning, it has to go. We have to dismantle it, and then we can put it back together, and we can start to organize your closet, if you will. And I'll just answer the second part of that, not to be interruptive. The second part of that is I have a team of trusted people that I put together. I spent years on Wall Street helping people with succession planning. I no longer do that, but I know it's part of the bigger picture in order for protection, in order for you to feel more grounded. So I'll bring in a team, estate attorneys. If it's somebody with marketing experience, I know whom I want on that team. And that way I'm not the one who is making all the decisions. I'm passing you off so that you are learning from multiple different personalities, because mine is a little bit different.
I try to learn from all my personalities.
Yeah, it depends which Sandy you're getting that day.
So when you have somebody come in what do you see as the difference between someone who gets results with you and somebody who stays right in the loops? Is it the refusal to clean that closet out?
Absolutely. I'm very upfront. Not everyone's my client. We don't mesh with everyone. I'm against a lot of, like I said, in the industry. So if you're looking for a quick fix, that's not the way. This isn't 10 years of talk therapy, but we're going to get results rather quickly because psychotherapeutic coaching gets results fast. It's much different. That's the neurolinguistic side to that. So when we look at someone who comes in and gets results, they're the ones who do the work. And what I found, and this is probably a very overused word in the industry, but accountability. What I noticed is when you follow a framework, and I'm not a rule follower, so I'll put it that way. It takes every ounce of energy for me to assert myself into the world of rule following. Not everyone is the same. I learn your personality rather quickly, and I also know how to bring you back to center. So everybody that comes into my world that gets results, they do the work, but you are going to be held accountable. You ask my clients at 1 a.m. if I'm texting them because I didn't get their journal entry, they know. You're not going to slip through the cracks with me. Even when I hit 50 clients that I work with now, they're getting results because that's my commitment level to you. And I knew that was something that was missing in industry. Again, I'm always about going against what everyone else is doing.
So do you find when you take on a new client, is there a telltale that you see that lets you know whether it's psychological or tactical that's holding them up? Tactical meaning process, or that there's a psychological block that they need to work through for their success to start shining through?
I'm going to say 99% of it's psychological, but I listen for key words. I listen to language. I also read people really well as far as energetically. So when they come to me and they have these problems, the tactical comes from something that's internal. They can't hold the structure. So it really is. And I feel as most people align with me because the mirror comes up and all the things I've lived and been through, I've already done the work. So it's easy for me to sit there and say, I was in your position. I remember the nights of struggling to figure out how I was going to pay payroll in our other company. And I went through the succession plan nightmare that took me 3 years to get out of it. I remember not taking a paycheck for a year just so that our employees stayed on and our families were served. And I wish someone out there existed like me to be able to walk me through, how do I get out of this? And it was not tactical. It was psychological. It was a burden. And the resilience level that you need to embody to be a business owner. Right there, I always commend anyone who says, well, I want to start a business. Great. Why? And do you have what it takes to be able to go with the ebbs and flows? And if you ask, I'd say the majority of people that go into business for themselves, they failed once or twice before they actually made it stick.
Yeah. I think that I had shared with you, I had a situation where I went to some counseling to work through some stuff. And that counselor, the one thing he said was, he goes, you have no clue how to fail. And I say that to say, are there ever businesses that you go into coach that your thought is, they need to shut this down and move on to another idea because it just isn't going to work? Because a lot of type A personalities, we don't know how to fail because failure is an equation to quitting. And if you don't quit, then so many of our minds go, no matter what the problem is, we can fix it and get this.
Agreed. And honestly, that probably, if someone comes to me and says that they've never failed at anything, they're not my client, because I will walk you through a million ways that you have failed in your life.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times with that perception, as he said to me, it was, your perception is if you don't quit, you don't fail. And his point was there had been times that I should have turned out the lights and walked on because there was no fix to that particular problem. So there was failure there, but there is also, and where I was going with this is getting somebody to accept failure doesn't mean that you've just failed and that's all it's going to be. It means this didn't work out. This failed with your results and you need to move on to something fresh to where you can succeed at them?
So one of the earliest parts to the whatever program that they choose with me, whatever offer they take, we work on strengths and weaknesses. My job, again, just like you, I don't want you to run from your past and move to your future. I don't want you to concentrate on the weaknesses. We can always hire around it. But I need you to understand your strengths. So depending on what that comes to me with, what I read from their strengths or what they think are their strengths, many of them are misaligned in their mission. So maybe they went into it. I look at it as, and hopefully, I don't know the average age of your listeners. However, I think back to The Price is Right. And I think when they used to do the Plinko chip game. And for someone whom doesn't know what they want to do with their future, they're 18 years old. Do I go to college? Do I start a business? Do I go into the trades? What am I good at? So people settle in on what their thoughts are that they're good at, and then they try to ride it out when it really isn't their internal mission to do so. So I can catch on, and I will say I have a fair amount of clients that are in businesses that we're going to transition. We're going to change maybe where you're spending all of your efforts, and I see that very quickly. I just have to have discernment on how fast I offer that up to them. And just because you can do one thing really well doesn't mean that it's your mission. It's not your destiny. So we're going to work on, doesn't mean you're failing at it. It doesn't mean that it's not working for you. Are you happy? Whatever happiness means to you, is it fulfilling? Are you gratified by it? And I mean, like I said, I have lawyers who go into practice just because that's what they did. And now they're not happy in, what they chose to practice law in. I have guys that are in an HVAC track that should never have gone into business for themselves, but it's what they were good at. So really part of the work is deciding, it doesn't mean that you have to shut the business down. It's maybe you were meant to do something different. We just have to draw it out of you. And it's not just a decision that's made today. And it's going through the process. I've done it. I've reinvented several times. And I think that's one of my superpowers, is that I was good at a lot of things and didn't become masterful at any one of them. But I know a lot about it. I know a little bit about a lot of things, and I take all of that learning, and then I can create that in other people.
So what belief pattern do you see fairly consistently in entrepreneurs that caps their success?
Themselves, their ego drive, more often than not. They're overperforming. They're constant proving their own limitations, hitting glass ceilings that they're stuck at, feeling emotionally overwhelmed and not telling anyone, misaligned with their leadership, not understanding what they're truly best at. They try to be a manager, micromanager. Instead, they're a true leader, not using their skill sets. So they think that starting a company that automatically makes them a leader, but leaders, there's a different designation for a leader, right? I'm not the best of managers, but I'm a really good leader. So we have to find out, and that thought that this is who I have to be successful in business is what keeps them in this loop, in this stuckness, if you want.
What I've found through my career is a lot of times the leader of a team is not the manager. It is, exactly. I have spent more time in leadership roles before I went out on my own that just happened because my coworkers trusted me, trusted my knowledge, and would come to me, and also knew that I wasn't going to make them feel stupid. And it wasn't stuff that the boss needed to know they didn't know, because maybe the boss would think, you should already know this. And it kind of puts you in that self-dedicated role where people trust you enough to want to follow you. And I find that in a lot of companies I've seen, and even now where I've watched some, there are people in management roles that their bosses should never have put them in a management role.
Absolutely.
Because they have no management skills whatsoever. They don't know how to talk to people. They don't know how to come in and learn that you want to be successful. You don't have each employee adapt to you. You figure out how to adapt to what gets the most out of each employee. You don't talk down to your employees. You don't roll your eyes when you ask a question, which in a lot of cases is a setup question, so you can feel good about yourself to where you can go, you should have known that. When I see leaders do that in other companies, I have to bite my tongue and walk out, because my first thought was, if you did that working for me, you'd either get it under control or you'd be looking somewhere else, because you are costing us money in-house, because then people don't want to be around you. And then people don't want to ask you questions, because when they ask you questions, they don't know whether you're going to help them or try to talk down to them to make them feel stupid. And I generally find that person that's making other people feel stupid, a lot of cases, they're actually the dumbest person in that office. They've just got a huge ego, but they just not near as smart as they think they are.
Well, and that's the identity of a leader. And I really have, over the years, hiring is done, I feel, improperly. We put butts in seats that don't belong in the seats just to fill a role, instead of looking at the characteristics of people that we want. Culture is everything to me. In my early 20s, I went to go work for a company under $1 million. We went to 65 million. And it was the people. We understood the hiring dynamic. And again, everything I do is against the grain, and it's not purposeful. It's just because I know that what works at times isn't what someone else did really well in corporate, especially for small business. So people, the mindset of a job seeker, especially women, is they look at a job description and they look at what skill sets that they have to have, and they may not apply to the job because they don't have two of them. Like, they could have 15 of the skill sets and miss two and say, well, no, that job isn't right for me. When I looked at any time, and I've hired thousands of people in any of the roles that I've been in, and I always look at, who can this person become? What are their characteristics? Do they match our culture? And do they understand our value system? And then maybe we have to create a new role. So the old fashioned resume and then hire doesn't exist with me. I don't even look at resumes. I want to meet you. And are you coachable? Are you trainable? Can you learn skills? But most importantly, do you fit in with what we're doing as far as the value system and the culture? Culture is everything. Are you willing to put the time and the dedication in to becoming that person that fits in with what we're trying to achieve? And that is one thing I've noticed, Clint, is throughout my career, the people that were at the top, they didn't have clarity of their mission. So how am I aligning with what your values are? So one of the things that everyone does when they come into my world, I don't care what position you hold in the company, is you do a dream life worksheet.
Yeah.
And that helps everyone to really understand, what do I want out of my life?
We had somebody they're close to the family, and a door had opened for them to move into a different career. And they were looking at their resume, and a lot of times it is not what you know, it's who you know, and what does that person see in you. Mm-hmm. If I bring you on, can I coach you to the person that I think you can be, even though you don't know the industry? And this individual was talking about their resume. Well, I've done this, and she was in leadership with what she did, but when you're going through it, she goes, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And I started walking through her resume of what she did for her current career. This is transferable, and this is how. This is transferable. It changed her whole mentality heading into her interview. Instead of going, wow, I really want this opportunity, but I don't know that what I have that can do it, to all of a sudden going, I've done a lot that helps me with this career. And I think times with hiring, that there's also things where some managers miss. Instead of doing what you said, let me interview you and talk to you and see what you have to offer. Well, these are good, but you've not done anything in my industry, so I'm not going to look any further. Instead of transferable in the unwritten that you don't see in personalities of going, I provide this opportunity. This person is probably going to really work hard for me. And the superstar on the team is not always a superstar. In fact, I was listening to a podcast where Tony Robbins was on with Cody Sanchez, and one of the things that I'm going to paraphrase was talking about, you may have a superstar in your office, but if they are disrupting your whole office culture and environment, they have to go. This goes back to some of the jobs I've looked at where people I've seen, the boss needs to let them go because they are disrupting the entire culture. And that costs you money. And people don't always realize if you've got that star salesperson, maybe they're selling a lot, but every time they're in the office, everybody cringes. And anybody that works with them, they can cost you money at the end of the year because of the way they're treating people.
100%. And I feel as if most of the times the CEO actually has to go. Number one, it's a lot of responsibility for the CEO in taking that role, because everything comes back to you, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It comes back to you. And if you're ineffective, then your entire team will be ineffective, and you're gonna look at that. So I'm gonna say that a lot of the companies I work for, and I actually have removed leadership. I've removed owners from being the leader and the voice of the company because they are afraid to delegate. I have to do it or it doesn't get done. So sometimes they're their own worst enemy. However, if they can acquiesce and they can go into a different role, and hey, you want to stay on the road or you want to handle all these things, then we'll put you in the CEO position, and we're going to bring somebody else in who can corral your people and can actually be effective because they're seeing it. One thing I'm really good at is seeing potential. And it hasn't served me very well in my dating life, but because I see everybody's potential. However, uncovering what people's potential is most important to me. And that's where a resume gets people stuck, especially with AI now. We can create ourselves to look like the best employee ever. But I see through it because I'm going to ask questions. And I would rather have a green, meaning unseasoned, person come into my world with the characteristics that fit my company. And I'd hire them so that, not so that I can train them to be mini me's, but what can I take from the strengths that you have? And I know, because being in sales for so many years, I was really bad at implementing. I was bad at note taking, as any salesperson probably can
I'm terrible.
relate to, right? I went out and my job was to go meet people and to form relationships and to understand where we can do work together. But now you're asking me to go in and keep straight books and use all your CRMs. Well, I would go from seeing, 15 people a day down to 8 because I'm sitting there so I decided on my own at one company, I hired an assistant for all the salespeople, and we helped pay half her salary, and we became more productive because of it. So the potential was there for the salespeople. The potential was there for someone who loves to help implement. I mean, I'm a visionary, high visionary. But if I didn't have my assistant that I have now, none of what I do would get done. Because this is where my role is. This is what I'm good at. And being the forefront or doing the on-sites and going to people's offices or into their client, I'd like to feel and go in and understand the dynamic. If she weren't with me, I wouldn't be able to scale as fast as I'm scaling. So knowing that potential is critical. And if people don't have that discernment, then companies aren't going to grow.
Yeah, I resemble that remark. An example,
Yeah.
I was tasked with heading up a committee with our chamber. It was business development membership.
Mm-hmm.
My visions are good. Vision, the structure to put around it. And because I was recently put on the board of directors, I can only liaison.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to find somebody to take over. And the person that I picked, I straight up told everybody, she will be much better than me. Her mind is so detail-oriented that everything that I said, here's the structure, she'll fill in all the gaps. I know where my strength is, and it is that people trust me. Name of my business, genuine, like the story here, genuine business stories. It's what you see is what you get. But I also know that when it comes to making my behind set, I have to force myself to sit to do the tedious work that I actually, absolutely my personality is like, I freaking hate doing this. I'd rather be out bringing more business in.
Absolutely.
But, it's still that part of that transition to being able to afford to bring somebody else on and, look at VAs like we've talked about to grow that, so.
That's poor. So poor leadership tries to push people to do the things that they're not good at in fear of them. They say, well, this is the job, again, job description, and you need to be able to do that. But if you're going to keep me running at full speed, then hire around me.
Yeah.
Hire around me, because I throw ideas out so quickly, and I need someone who can catch them and then put them into action. If you want me to sit down, I mean, I remember even when I was doing financial planning and succession side, I could meet companies. I'll sit there. I'll go over your P&L. I'll look for identity gaps in your profit and loss statement. I understand what your needs are. I'm not doing the plan. I'm going to go out and meet someone else, and I'm going to put you to my team that is exceptional. That's not my strong suit. I know it. I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm not good at. And I'm not going to sit here and try to be better at things that it's going to take me much longer than if I brought someone else on. And companies spend thousands of dollars trying to coach people up in their weak side instead of just hiring around that. Let people go like me.
Yeah.
Understand that my vision is stronger than the adaptability of me trying to sit down and do the things that are going to take me a lot longer than, another man or woman that can then complement me beautifully.
See, I love that aspect. One thing that I have a pet peeve about with quotation mark leaders,
Mhm.
and that is micromanaging. If you feel like you need to micromanage who you have on your team, then you've either got a problem or you hired wrong. Because how can you be profitable if you feel like everybody you hire, you have to look over their shoulder, micromanage? My belief has always been there's point A, there's point B, there's timeline, and there's budget. But there's a lot of different ways to get from point A to point B and encompass the timeline and the budget and be in. And it doesn't necessarily have to be my way.
It doesn't have to be your way. And that is where most leaders get stuck. Now, again, you have to understand the personality of the people that you hire. Obviously, working for Tony Robbins, we did a ton of disc profiles. I've done every personality test under the sun because I've had to, fill different sales roles. So I've taken all of them lead back to the same path. Don't let me do the implementation. It is the way it is. And leaders, there is a control that a lot of leaders possess. I just left one that straight out said, I can't control you. And I don't understand why you would want to control me. Tell me what the destination is and let me get there on my own journey. I will make it happen. Just allow me to use my skill sets in order to get to where you want me to go. But if their vision is unclear and not locked, it's, they're keeping it all in their head. It's just a control. And that's why I don't really understand the whole hierarchy of leadership and the corporate thought process. So why it's okay if we have directors, as long as there aren't more directors than the soldiers, because not everybody wants to be at that level. And again, accountability for your position and your role. But really it comes down to, who cares about a title? Are you getting results?
No.
Are you looking? Like, I don't want to be the one to measure KPIs, but I need it to be, for us to have something that's measurable. And revenue is not the only measurement of a company's success, right? The profitability and what does it feel like to work for you? What does it feel like day in? Do you want the stomach ache on Sunday night? Right? I don't want any of my employees.
I've had that before.
Stomach ache. I've had it many times. I knew I was in the wrong space.
Yeah. And part of it we discussed, it was a boss I worked for that is an amazing man, is a human amazing. But literally before I left, every Sunday knowing I had to deal with my one-on-one with him just literally made me ill. And I don't mean throw up ill, but that feeling and sense of dread. And when you create that circumstance, you're not going to be profitable. That is not the best way to coach your team. So what are some of the things, with the duration and experience you have, what do you see different that leaders struggle with now than they did 10 years ago? Or is it still the same basic things that we all as human nature have to work on?
I don't think anything has changed. It's all structurally the same. There's survival patterns. That's it. Bottom line. And it's all what you're willing to do. The imposter wiring, the leadership blind spots, nothing has changed. I don't care where you went to college. I don't care what books you read, what degree you hold. None of that matters to me, right? There's a human instinct to it. Nothing has changed. I mean, it is a little bit different to do business because we have more accessibility. It's easier to find information out. Whereas, me growing up, I had my old fashioned Rolodex with my big map, on the seat next to me. And it was a little bit more difficult to go, but I feel as if that made me who I am today because I still continue to think outside the box. I don't want it to be easy. I want it to be something that is aligned with the people that I want into my world. So I feel as nothing has changed because there's still the child in every adult that we need to bring to light. So the internal still needs to be worked on. And it's just because our nation is kind of a little disgruntled at the moment for many reasons all over both sides, politically, in every area. The only dynamic is, and I'm going to say something that probably is going to go against a lot of the grain. As much as I am professional and I love owning a business and I love being able to bring such impact to the people that I serve, and I've done so many great things for people, again, because I wish I had that mentor when I was growing up or when I was running businesses. However, the times were different, and women and men had roles. And when women are now pushing themselves to points where we're emasculating men, and men are not providers as much as they used to be. Like growing up, my mom stayed home. She went back to work when I was like 15 or 16. However, that family dynamic is how we were born to be. So now women are having more nervous breakdowns. We're handling more. Our nervous systems weren't created to be able to handle the stress that we put on ourselves as mothers. I mean, being a mother to my 4 children, obviously, is the most important role that I have. And the male was, men have their limitations. So men now are trying to step into women's roles as, a stay-at-home dad and also trying to run a business. And really you were meant to be hunters. You were meant to go out and provide and protect. And we're trying to change all this dynamic now. And I want women to do everything that they can do. I do. I'm all about it. I will say that I am not woke, and that being a mother and when I was a wife, I was a great wife. And it was my most important role, the 2 roles I had. And we've changed that dynamic. So yeah, it's a little bit different because now you have women that are pushing themselves past the point of no return, and all for the sake of being able to have it all, do it all. In the old dynamic, it seemed to have worked better. And so now the competition's a little different. However, whatever works for people. I deal with, I love women, obviously. I have 3 girls myself, and one is an entrepreneur, opened her own business at 21. So I support her wholeheartedly. But yeah, the dynamic has changed and we shift with it. But the end result is, who are you? And what do you want to accomplish? And I think people really lost who they are. They're not sovereign anymore.
There's one dynamic in business that surprised me. Well, there's a lot that surprises us, but the one dynamic I'm referring to is some of my best bosses before I had my own business were women. I loved working for them. But I can also take you to close female friends that will tell you the worst bosses they had were other women, that they preferred to work for men. And I wonder from a psychological standpoint if it's ingrained enough in us that we are more respectful to the opposite sex. Because as a male boss, you get out of line with me, I can promise you the shutting of my door, even if my boss would have been, don't ever speak to me that way again. I'll do anything you want, but you won't disrespect me and talk down. Where that whole delivery is different. I used to be told, a former relationship was talking to my mom, and she goes, your son Vince, but when I hear him on a business call, she goes, I can tell you if it's male, female, Caucasian, Hispanic, because his whole demeanor in the level of respect of how he knows each different individual needs to be treated. She goes, it's the most odd thing I've ever seen, but you don't have to worry about his delivery. Mm-hmm. But it changes, and I didn't realize that it changed to the point that if you listen to my conversations, you could figure out who I was talking to just by the way, and not changes in professional, but is in how I felt like we would get a better response and how we wanted to be communicated with, which goes back to what I told you, go in and learn your personalities to pick up so you can get the most out of them,
So one of the first classes, one of the most important classes that and this goes back to the neuro-linguistic practitioning, is to learn people's representational systems. So we all have a different representational system, and some of us are visual, some are auditory digital. and some are kinesthetic. So I always understand that from the beginning. It's just like me. I would rather if you call me or text me, right? That's why don't email me. It gets lost in the emails. But I also want to see something instead of hearing something. So understanding people and how they want to be treated, we don't ask enough questions. So being able to, for me, being in sales, I always learned the representational system. So I knew how to best affect you. And I also learned that people that were on my team, everyone was different. So just like good presentation, we have to hit on all four of the core criteria. Because if I just spoke for 2 hours and I didn't have visuals, I'm going to lose a quarter of my audience. If I didn't have testimonials, I didn't have statistics, I'm going to lose another quarter. If I just showed visuals the whole time, I'm losing anyone who's auditory. So learning the language patterns for me has become second nature. And I cannot sell ice to an Eskimo, and I don't want to. But I became very good at sales because I learned the different personality types, and I also learned how I can understand people. I've had amazing male bosses, and I've had spectacular female bosses. So I think really, again, it comes down to the characteristics of the person, not the gender. And I also do really well working with people that have respect. And I feel as if we lost a little bit, and that's the title culture that we became so used to. I grew up in an Italian family where, there were no elbows on the table, and that was disrespectful. So I always go back to, you look at my kids and they'll say that I was strict, but I allowed them to do whatever they wanted because I gave them boundaries. And if they crossed those boundaries, they had to pay the consequence. And I feel like that should be at work as well. You don't need to micromanage me. Just tell me what's okay and what's not okay. Understand how I align with you. How are we going to work together? And then we can have a conversation behind closed doors. But I feel like there's that push pull, and most of it stems from insecurity. Any leader that you ever have that's throwing their weight around, they're just insecure. Yeah. And that can mean multiple layers.
Throughout my career, I've been blessed. I've only had two bosses I didn't like working for. One boss, he was terrible. He had no leadership skills. He had no people skills. He was a successful entrepreneur, but he just was not the best at communication. He was condescending. He was just a real jerk. And then the second one we talked about that is an absolutely amazing man. And a good boss for some personalities, but you are going to adapt to his personality instead of him adapting, going, you know what, this is how I get more out of him. So I'm 56 years old. I've owned my own business for a while now, but it's a pretty fortunate tenure that started out in various different careers, from engineering to IT to sales to insurance, to be able to run that table and tell you almost every boss I had outside of two were great. And one of them, I'd be more than happy if he come into town and said, let's grab coffee, to go sit down and have coffee with him, because as a genuine person, his management skills weren't best for me, but as a human, really, really liked the guy.
And I love that. And I feel similarly. I've had some great bosses. I definitely have my stories, which will be in my book. And actually one of the worst bosses I ever had, we had a love-hate relationship, and we're friends again. His retention was terrible. I mean, in 12 years in business, when I started with him, he had over 600, we used to call it the graveyard drawer. So everybody, their business cards would get thrown in this drawer. They went through 600 and something employees in that whatever, 10, 12 years. That says a lot about a company as well. I mean, if I'm interviewing for any role I ever had, what does your turnover look like? Right. So asking those questions, and I hopefully we can go into some depth on really asking the right questions during the interview process, and understanding who you are. And that goes back to my training. And then what I saw the most, Clint, in the trades was that we took their best performer, especially the best service expert technician, and we promoted him to sales manager. And they had no leadership or managerial skills. They were good at what they did on the road, but we often want to promote the people who are best. Don't promote me as a manager. I didn't want to be promoted as a manager because I really wasn't a good manager. I wanted to be out on the road. I wanted to be, client facing. If you put me behind a desk, not going to happen. That's why I created my strategies the way I do now to help companies. If you had me doing this all day just on Zoom, You'd lose me.
You know, I think that a lot of times somebody that's the best in what they do, it's a mistake, and they bring them because the natural corporate evolution is to continue to promote.
Exactly. Interesting.
Here's two examples. Michael Jordan, at least for us in Gen X, will tell you that is the greatest we've ever seen in basketball.
Okay.
But I don't believe he would have made a good coach. But then you go to Larry Bird. Not only was he one of the best we've ever seen, but he was an amazing coach, and it didn't always translate. But now you take Michael to the business side of owning a team and putting people around him. Michael's a billionaire, and people don't realize that Michael Jordan built that off of his business mind, because that's before basketball players were paid hundreds of millions for contracts.
Right, exactly.
But as far as coaching and being out there on the floor, I don't know that he would have made a good coach, because I don't know that anybody could have put in the work that he did, kind of like Kobe Bryant too. But Bird was able to put in that hard work and then transition to mentoring and coaching. And I think there are a lot of times salespeople that were fantastic end up in sales managers roles, and the companies don't realize you just made a big blunder.
Huge mistake. I have endless stories, but you just said the word to me that is probably should be in quotations, and that's expectations.
Yeah.
And we look to coaches, or we have to understand people's baseline before anything else, right? We can't move them from A to B without understanding where they start out of its baseline. So Michael Jordan, his expectations, and I felt that way a little bit about myself as a manager. I'd be like, how do you not know that? Right? I mean, why is it taking you so long to learn that? It just wasn't something that I was good at. Being a leader and understanding how to affect people, because I understood people, the dynamic of how the people were made up, of what made them up internally, was my superpower. But running numbers and I've trained hundreds of people in my career. There was just the managerial section of that. It's not an intersect for me. But I'm wise enough to know that that's not really where I belong.
See, for me, anytime I can turn over something to somebody capable, it excites me. Let them go be successful. I don't need to micromanage you. I think we discussed this on our phone call. I'm going to trust but verify, but I'm going to give you that full bag of trust until you prove to me that you've yanked trust out of it, and then it's a lot harder to fill it back up. I mean, if you've got that trust, yeah. Well, I think
Fire fast.
hire slow and fire fast. But don't you think there are times you need to see if it is something that they've got the skill set? But sometimes people are afraid to go ask because they don't want to feel like they're dumb. And I think there are times you can coach somebody past because their dedication to you and your business is strong, and you can teach them what they need to know. And then there are others that know everything, even though they don't, and they can't be taught, and they're not ever going to fit into your culture. And to me, that's who you fire.
So absolutely, and you said something before about the top salesperson disrupting the company. I've seen it, many times. And once you get rid of the negative energy, everyone else rises above it. And that goes for anybody who's not doing their job and they're not performing, and we keep them on. Maybe we're afraid to lose them, or it's going to look bad for the company. But I really know that the misalignment, when it comes down to it, is because we didn't put enough effort into coaching up. So most times people don't get that close to other people to understand what their true potential is. And then we have this idea in our head of what it's supposed to be. And when they don't hit that, we have these false expectations and they don't rise to them, then we think that it's a bad fit. I have made IT people, you said it before, exceptional salespeople. Right? We just had to find that commonality. They don't need to talk their way into a sale. It's about asking the right questions. Where's the power of persuasion? How do we have likability? And some of my top performers were never in sales before, but we created it because we found the common ground of what makes someone inquisitive. What's a good consultation? How do we understand, in the trades, what do we do to inquire about a family's home and their lifestyle? And the industry doesn't teach a lot of that because we just put somebody who's very ego driven by I can fix anything into their home. And then we don't make proper options for them. And then we're left with a push sale, I call it, and then buyer's remorse. So understanding that dynamics of how what makes us. That's why I'm so geared into the identity work. And it's not easy to work with me. I will tell you that working with me, you can ask any client that I have now. I actually was texting a couple of them last night. I'm like, why do you guys work with me? And then
Mhm.
the response is, well, you have to look at it and say, but I'm effective. And the reason I am is because I have a belief system that's probably very different than anyone else in my industry. And I'm not looking at executive coaching as graphs. I'm looking at it as a real life. What does it mean to you? Where do you want to be? And what is holding you back? And then getting them to be emotionally vulnerable and talking about their past. And I've heard stories that'll make your toes curl. But we get past that and we leave that old conditioning and those old past stories that don't serve you. And until you do that, you're still going to act out of survival. We need sustained transformation, not a quick fix.
Yeah.
Right. So all your little bar graphs and all the other executive coaches that sit around and they learn something from, some framework another coach did, don't come to me. I don't need clients like that. We're going to do some real work.
When you were talking about being able to take somebody from IT and coach them into an amazing salesperson, sometimes they're better. What I have realized is my career aptitude right out of high school said, go into sales or become a TV evangelist. Well, we're sitting here so you can see what I chose.
Right.
But that sales personality, I have watched myself wrap up a sale and couldn't shut my mouth, and I've watched in that whole setting lose a sale because I just didn't know when to stop selling, to the point where you could see them go, okay, this guy's just full of it, instead of, and that unnatural salesperson a lot of times knows better when to shut it off than the salesperson, as we talk, that just continues to go. And I had to laugh when I left because I knew I wasn't getting a call back. And you can see in that eye when you've got a sale closed.
You know when he lost a sale.
Exactly.
You talked your way out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And really, again, it's the identity. And there's a lot to be said. I mean, throughout the process of working with me, my tagline is live your mission, burn the blueprint. The reason I say burn the blueprint is really you have to burn who you were in order to be able to become someone new. And that's the identity work. I also never want anyone to undervalue themselves in the position. If I'm going to charge what I charge, I earned it. I'm not just arbitrarily picking a number. So I also compare myself to a luxury brand. And I look at that because if you're looking at your top luxury brands, there's a demand for it. And they created that demand and they don't ever sell at a discount. So you go into a top steakhouse and that becomes a client experience. And most people that I coach, we work on their branding, and it's not just their truck wrap or, the way that your business card reads. It's about you and how do you become luxury and how do you become one in your space is that we don't discount. I would never discount my services. There's no reason to. I know who I am. I know what I stand for, and I am a luxury brand, and I want to create that. That's how we beat the competition.
And that goes back to your initial coaching with me, not knowing my value.
Not knowing your value.
And cutting that out.
And that's many of them, Clint. That's many business people because they have an old blueprint that they haven't worked past. That's their past coming in.
And that's usually selling out of your own pockets with salespeople that even when you coach not to, I find myself hard to do it. When we were talking earlier, I think it was about hiring or something that you said that you'd hope we'd be able to touch further on. Was it the hiring process or?
I'll give you something interesting. So when I worked with Tony, really, it was Chet Holmes' company. And that's probably a foreign name to many of your listeners. But Chet Holmes was one of the greatest marketers ever. He actually doubled the sales of 3 of Charlie Munger's companies. So he was a trusted advisor on the marketing and sales side. He was very disruptive, an incredible, incredible human being. He taught me things I'm forever indebted to. And one of it was his hiring process. So I entered this company. Actually, on my LinkedIn, the man who hired me, wrote me a recommendation, but we laugh about it today. And I was going in for more of a sales role, and they denied me. And it was the most interesting way. So we went through everything, my resume, my years of experience. It was a great conversation. At the end, he said, I don't think I hear sales superstar. And I said, excuse me? I said, I just showed you my numbers and I always had my brag book, so to speak. And I said, how do you not hear sales superstar? Like, this is a perfect role for me. What part of what we spoke about gave you to come to that conclusion that I wasn't, ready for this job? And that was it. That was the basis. So he's like, all right, okay, I understand. So it went on for a little bit more. I mean, obviously I'm, dating myself a little bit, but it was years ago prior to email. Well, we had email, but that was about it. And then he passed me to someone else and they did the same thing to me. Sorry, you're just not going to make it to the next round. And I was like, I'm like, what is going on here? What are you people not hearing? I've been the front facing salesperson for almost every organization. I've started companies and then I went in and then I asked him again, I said, tell me where this went south. Tell me how I can be better and how are we going to work on that together when I work for you. Right. And that one line when I said, how are you going to be able to coach me when I work for you that I'm going to become what you need me to be? And then I learned after I think it was 3 rejections that was his process. And actually Tony does talk about that. And I was watching a reel. He talks about how Chet hired sales superstars. If you can't handle rejection on a call or your interview, you're not going to be able to handle rejection with your clients. And then what line of questioning are you going to be able to ask to find out what you didn't do that we should go back and look at again? And that is all sales psychology. So they did it on me, and I forever used it in the hiring process of people. Like, I want to know, how are you going to overcome an objection if I just say, oh, you're so great? And anyone who ever came into me, and when I say I've hired hundreds of salespeople, I've hired hundreds of salespeople. And anyone who came into me to see that top of the leaderboard, I'm going to be there. They never made it.
Now,
salespeople have to learn humility. There's something as ego strength, but you have to have humility. How am I going to be able to be, one question I love that I would listen to, it's, how are you going to train me? And then the next one was, what is going to make me successful in this role?
Well, the one thing I love about it is you did presumptive hiring. In sales, we call it presumptive selling. But it wasn't just accepted that I don't see you as a sales superstar. You went right into, you're going to hire me, so tell me how you're going to help make me better. And I've always loved the presumptive sell, not the pushy sell, but the, look, let's get your policy in place now that we've discussed all your risk, and here's what we need, and that just assumption that we're moving forward, is that. And I think sometimes it's hard to get salespeople to find that balance between the arrogance of closing the sale and the confidence of presumptive selling. Because there is a balance. You come across as arrogant as, the pushy salesperson. In my generation, years ago, it was the pushy car salesman. Was discussed and sometimes disgusted, because it was so. But that industry's come a long ways too. For those of you that are listening, this is from 30 or 40 years ago that I'm discussing this.
Well, one thing, we did a lot of role play when I worked for Tony and Chet, and it was difficult to hear your voice come over. You knew you were hot seated. And I do a lot of role play with my clients, and it's uncomfortable because the people that you don't want to hear you are the ones who actually know what you're saying. We often forget that the person on the other end isn't as knowledgeable as we are because we're the experts. So the consumer doesn't need to hear everything. They just have to be asked the right questions so we understand what they want their desired outcome to be. Their desired outcome. When I leave here today, what will have made this a successful appointment? Like, let's ask right up front. And that way we can kind of get into the line of questioning. So we never have to discuss our product or features. We just need to know our competition well enough that we know what we do against the competition and ask the right line of questioning. And we don't need to convince anyone of anything, because if we ask the right questions, they'll understand what we do better than the people that come in. And I gladly, you want to bring in 5 estimates? Okay, good. What are you looking for when you bring them in? So using a really great line of questioning will help push that faster. And Chet was all about it. So he would hot seat us and he would say, this is for your own good. Everything that we're doing here is I'm pushing you past the brink, but there's all of us who are going to help you. And oftentimes people don't want to role play. And I will tell you, any company that's listening, you are doing yourself a disservice if you are not sitting in a room every Tuesday morning. I don't care if it's 6 a.m. because that's what time we had to go in, and we had to do role play. And you had to know everything up front. It wasn't a contrived presentation. However, I needed to know everything from A to Z in the 16-page booklet in order to still pick up and start at any point and ask the right questions. So it's not it was assumptive a little bit. However, I wanted to know, what are you going to do to make me better? If you're not hearing sales superstar, what is your methodology that's going to make me a sales superstar?
The one thing we hear from new salespeople, and I was guilty, and I just had this conversation with somebody, is I hate role playing. I'm not doing it. None of us like role playing. It's made for you to be uncomfortable so that when you find yourself in a position in a sale, that you become uncomfortable because all of a sudden the way you've constructed this in your mind for this meeting goes off the rails. You can handle it. I think Mike Tyson used to say everybody has a plan until you get hit in the mouth when you're in the ring. Business, when we go in to talk to customers, we've all got a plan until we don't. And then you better be able to pivot and handle being uncomfortable. And to me, that's what role playing is. It's not comfortable sitting with your colleagues and everybody is role playing and being listened to and being critiqued to help you, But I think it's a very crucial role in getting better.
So that brings me back to a lot of what I do with my clients is the comfortable lifestyle and the comfort zone. We hear that all the time, but what it really means is we're afraid of uncertainty. When we learn to become resourceful, we don't care about uncertainty. So my resilience in life has been through those trial and errors, right? Being able to grow the early side to my businesses, and then being a divorced mom of 4 kids with a wonderful ex-husband. I'm not going to say it. I don't want to say single mom because he's such a big part of my life and the kids. However, what I found was being resourceful helped me to be able to pivot. And really that was the number one strategy that I use, is about resilience and being resourceful. How can I find what I need in the least amount of time and not worry about the outcome? I never attach myself to an outcome. I attach myself to a process in order to get to where my desired result is. But I'm also very clear when you talk about dream life, like I work on that all the time. I'm constantly revising because I know where I want to go. I know where I'm going. And my job is to impact as many people as I can. Otherwise, I would just go work for someone else at this point, of my career.
What kind of led you to this direction of the coaching? Because I know from our phone call, and we're kind of short on time, so you've had a very successful career that led to coaching. If you want to briefly touch on that, because I'm looking over here going, I'm pushing up against schedule I told you about. So kind of briefly touch on that, and then let everybody know kind of what led you to how you help businesses today.
I had to fix myself. I had to transform myself to become better in a lot of areas. And I went through everything that I teach. Everything that I work on with my clients, I've already lived.
Yeah.
So it was learned behavior, survival tactics as a child, and really looking internally at who I was and who I wanted to be. I've always been a leader. I knew that was easy for me. That was not something that came, that I had to work on. I went through life hating school, not conforming to the learnings. I was bored to death. And then everything being about testing scores or, being able to be labeled. I just knew I beat to my own drum, and I wanted to be able to help other people realize that the system that was built wasn't the one that's going to create success for you if you don't want it to.
Yeah.
I did a ton of reading, and I feel like I was misaligned for companies I worked for because I wasn't willing. It wasn't like I was out there being like, oh, I'm going to be so rebellious. It was just that I had a different vision for maybe the company, and I don't know. That was really the catalyst for it, was I can do this better on my own and affect the people that are most like me.
Well, that's great. So now I'm going to hit on something that I've been very interested in, and I know that the audience
Okay,
will be.
I can't
Let's
wait.
talk about your Tony Robbins days, because I think to a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs, he's meant a lot to a lot of people, even those that he does not know just from reading or listening to podcasts he's been on. To help transform this up here that you and I've
Mhm.
talked about is getting ourselves in the middle of it, and going forward. So,
So most people don't want to keep themselves in check. Let's be honest. We don't want to look internal. We want to look external. We want to become validated by everyone externally. We want to project our insecurities onto other people. We want to appear larger in life. And when I went to go work for Business Breakthroughs with Tony and Chet, it really was about understanding my own dynamic. And where was I pushing instead of pulling in? And working for them, I've always been interested in the world of the mind. I was studying astrology and numerology and neuroscience before it was neuroscience when I was a kid. One of my earliest books was probably Napoleon Hill, because I knew I was different, and I knew that I wasn't, just because I didn't like to regurgitate information I was learning in school didn't mean I wasn't smart. And we're brought up to think if you're not doing well in school that you're going to not be a success in life. And that's kind of what Tony helped people become high achieving with the potential that life gave them, and what was the impact that they could bring to the table. And that's where I learned. And then I started studying for certification, neuro-linguistic practicing. And, I'm in my master's now, which, I have 15 certifications in, that took me years to, it wasn't about getting them so I could hold up my certification, be like, oh, look what I did. Because I did the same thing in the financial world, right? You had to have a certification in order to be able to plan a license to be able to plan. However, I saw the bigger goal was to fix me. So every time I became certified in trauma, or I became certified in neuroscience, it was to fix me. I wanted to learn. I needed to know how I could be better. I needed to know where, my deficiencies were. And not really in the business world. It was more about being a mom and being a better friend. I've had the same best friend since I'm a little girl, and you want something to know about yourself, you ask your kids or you ask your best friends, because they're not going to hold back.
since kindergarten, one of my best
It's
friends.
Me too, and even some earlier, and we're still all so close. And I was blessed in so many ways, but I had some interesting childhood moments that shaped me. And when you learn from that, and being the youngest of the first four grandchildren, you're the one who gets stoned the most often. And coming out of that and saying, I was with all intent and purpose, I was the one who had the worst grades, walked out of my SATs, didn't care about college, but I could fix, a motorbike, I could fix a car, I could build houses with my dad. So I had all these other skill sets that I needed to learn, that was okay. It was okay that I didn't follow their path, and that I needed to be autonomous in whatever worked for me and be okay with it. So I'm going to say that Tony taught me how to think differently and then go after it and learn my own potential. He layered on that. And one thing he's really good at is something that I think I mirror him in, is find someone who's doing it already. Model yourself after them and find out what makes you you. And that's the internal work I do. And Tony, he was, he was only really, he owned 70 companies at the time. So he was really only with us. But we also had other mentors like John Asseroff, and, they brought in other people. But Chet, again, he was probably more important to me during that time than Tony. Chet was just such a force. But Tony taught me how to understand yourself.
Yeah.
So my clients come in, and the first month we work together, we're not touching anything in your business.
When you touched on education and grades, there's one thing that has struck me. Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs.
Drop out.
Exactly. So no matter what you think about them personally, because the more our former CEO heroes that you might look at tend to run their mouths and frustrate half the population, it doesn't distract from the fact of what they actually accomplished. And there, to me, there is a big difference between learning and structured education. And, I'm a huge fan of we better be learning in business till the day we die, or we're going to stop being productive because the world does shift. But I can remember telling my daughter when she was in college, D is for degree. Quit worrying about the grades. You're not going to be a lawyer. You are not going to be a doctor. So quit worrying about that. And let's go do what makes you good and just get the degree and get on with life. And, so it's not disparaging anybody that has a degree.
Absolutely
But
right.
it is the fact that, to me, too many businesses, it's become the end all be all, and it's become the good old boy club. Oh, I can't put you in this position of leadership because you don't have a degree. Well, the person has 25 years experience and more knowledge in your business than most everybody else, and they're already your leader on that team. You just don't realize it because you're out of touch.
Yeah, and a degree taught me discipline. I worked full time and went to school full time, so that's really where I sat with it. My sister's a teacher, so she was all about education and continuing education. And there are a lot of different places where to be a doctor, to be a lawyer, or to engineer. Yeah, we
Yeah,
need you to get that education. We need you to go to school.
absolutely.
We need that advanced learning, please. We don't need brain surgeons just saying, "Oh, I used to do what was that operation?" I'm thinking we need you to understand actually where you are in that. But that I just don't. I'm more of most of my friends who are millionaires did it all on their own. Yeah, they barely made it through high school. My daughter at 21, owning her own business and hitting $1 million in her first year, she barely got out of high school. She was in it for social reasons. I'm not saying that it's everyone's path. I'm saying that I'm more for the rebels and the nonconformists and the people that know that they're different. And how can we stand out?
Well, Sandy, I've loved having you on. We're going to head into the lightning round.
Okay.
What's your go-to? Coffee or something else to get you started in the morning?
So every morning I journal.
You journal, and then
Every
what's your
morning,
drink? You have
coffee black,
coffee
coffee
black.
black, and only for the taste.
So when you feel stress creeping in, what's your fastest reset move?
I anchor myself. Anchoring is a technique and where you get yourself back to a state of mind where things were good. Let's just keep it short and simple.
What's one small daily habit you refuse to skip?
Brushing my teeth 3 times a day.
What's one buzzword you're tired of hearing?
Scaling.
What's your go-to turn your brain off show or hobby?
Don't really watch a lot of TV. I would say, as far as hobby, I would say stress related would be go to the gym or do something, go walk, get my mind moving.
So we're going to go to your best purchase under $100. What's something under $100 that genuinely made your work or life better?
I would say my weekly massages.
Sweet. So the WWE has this, or I think Tony or others in your profession have this with public speaking. What is your walk-up song?
I already know this because I have it. Welcome to the jungle.
Fantastic. If you could instantly give business owners one superpower, what would that be?
Look inside before we're trying to fix the outside. Do the inner work.
A special thank you to you, Sandy. I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for taking the time. You got an amazing story, and quite honestly, with your background, the podcast you've been on, I am grateful and I'm humbled that you found my little show here and that you wanted to come on. So thank you so much. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Genuine Business Stories. If you're enjoying the show, consider becoming a sponsor, making a donation back to Lone Star Community Radio. Without Lone Star Community Radio, it's not possible for this show or other shows like mine that Lone Star produces for us. If you know a small business owner with a great story worth sharing, have them reach out. They just might be our next guest. So thank you. Until next time, keep showing up, keep building, and keep it genuine. Thanks. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Clint. Appreciate you.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
Bye.